Well, hello again, fellow humans. It's the Big Heavy here, and I'm talking about work from home setups, and in particular, one of the challenges of a work from home setup, and that's dealing with all the cables. Now, that may seem like a little bit of a trivial challenge, or what the cool kids would call a first world problem. But if it's an obstruction to you effectively using your work from home setup, or being productive, getting in the morning and taking advantage of whatever time of day your flow state naturally occurs, or even, worst case, it's something that has you sitting at the kitchen table in an uncomfortable position, pecking away on your laptop instead of using that super awesome, multi-monitor setup that you put together, then maybe it goes from, nitpick to something that's a little more of a longer term problem. In fact, a problem like this almost makes me think that it would be appropriate for a 90s era infomercial.
Do you struggle with too many cables in your work from home desk setup? Tired of crawling onto your desk to plug things in? Imagine if you had just one cable to connect all your technology. Connect to keyboards, mice, monitors, webcams, storage devices, speakers, even your USB-powered hand warmers?
All right, so things may not be that dramatic, but having a single cable to be able to connect your laptop to your work from home setup does have a number of benefits. First of all, when you're rushing to and from various video calls, maybe you're just starting up in the morning and have to jump on a call, or you're getting back from a trip or whatnot, being able to plug one thing in your computer and in a matter of seconds being able to log in and get productive, have your video conferencing set up, your larger speakers, your larger monitor, all that stuff, just makes it a lot easier and more convenient to use your work from home setup. Another benefit I found that I really like is it also allows multiple people to use your work from home desk, monitor, keyboard, etc. This was particularly impactful for our family during all the COVID stuff when we were, working from home, kids were learning from home, all that. Anyone in the family, whether my wife who was working from home or one of our 3 kids who was studying from home, could go and plug into one of my 2 work from home desk setups with a single cable, and they had access to all their files while also having access to the big screen, to the keyboard, to the mouse, and all of that. And I didn't have to give them a login to my desktop. I didn't have to risk having them go into my laptop where I do my work and accidentally delete something or respond to an email or just get into some sort of technology related trouble. The single cable setup is also nice if you have multiple laptops. And again, that may sound like a far-fetched scenario to some people, but if you're somebody that has a laptop for work that's locked down that you really can't do anything with, and then you have your personal laptop that you actually use for games or whatnot, having one cable and just being able to plop between them throughout the day, or when it comes to quitting time and you want to get in the round of whatever your favorite game is, or check your personal email, or work on your side hustle, or whatever the case may be, being able to take one cable, pull it out from one machine, pop it into the other, and still have your same desk, monitor, keyboard, etc., is a pretty nice capability. Most laptops that have been made in the last, I would say, 3 to 5 years do have a USB-C port. The one nuance that you have to look for that I've only seen on one computer that we got for our family kind of at a bargain basement special a number of years ago is some of them will have the correct USB-C port, which is that sort of oval-shaped plug, but it will only allow for charging, or it might only allow for connecting hard drives or something like that, and it won't give you the full standard set of USB-C functionality, which generally includes the ability to charge, the ability to send video over that cable, the ability to send audio, and the ability to send data. So it really is a single cable that lets you do all the things you'd want to do with a computer and replaces those goofy docking stations that generally were pretty expensive in the past and also generally were limited to a specific manufacturer or even a specific model of laptop. So as soon as you change your laptop, the thing ended up being obsolete. Whereas the USB-C based desk setup essentially gives you a bit of future proofing. As long as laptops continue to have USB-C, which should be the foreseeable future, you still have that ability to use any laptop with whatever set of monitor, keyboard, mouse, speakers, etc. you've designed and that works best for you. So let's talk about what you need to get all of this set up. So the first that we just talked about, which is relatively obvious, is you do need that laptop with a USB-C connection. Ideally, it is a USB-C connection that supports video, audio, data, all that stuff, as well as charging over USB-C, which is called USB-C power delivery, or you'll see it abbreviated sometimes as USB-C PD, which is power delivery. It is not P. Diddy. And you'll also need some sort of device that accepts that USB-C connection from your laptop and connects it to all your other peripherals. And again, that's typically keyboard, mouse, monitor at a basic level. Now there's two ways that you can get that connectivity. The first, which I prefer, is to have a monitor that has a USB-C input and allows you to connect a bunch of USB peripherals to that monitor. So my setup in both of my offices is I do have a USB-C capable monitor. It does have that USB-C PD, again, power delivery feature. So it delivers power over the USB-C cable, which allows me to charge my laptops. And some monitors will be able to deliver more power than others. You'll generally see that rated in watts. So just make sure you get something with enough power to charge your laptop of choice. And then each of these monitors has a bunch of USB, standard rectangular USB plugs on the back. And that's where you plug in all the things that you want to ultimately connect to your laptop when you plug in that single USB-C cable. So in my case, on the back of my monitor, I obviously have the power cord, which powers the monitor, but also runs power over that USB-C connection into my laptop. So I've got my charging checked off. Video gets sent over that USB-C cable, obviously, from the laptop to the monitor, so that allows me to display images on my monitor. And then I have one of my little Logitech wireless dongles plugged into the back. And yes, if you've never heard that term, dongle is actually the technical term for little tiny sticks that do some limited piece of functionality. And that provides connectivity to my Logitech keyboard and my Logitech mouse. You can use wired keyboards if you want, again, as long as they have USB or you have whatever adapter you need and can ultimately plug it into USB. You can plug that thing into your back of your monitor and be ready to go. I also have a USB webcam that plugs into the back of the monitor. And then a lot of monitors will have an audio output, particularly if they don't have speakers, which turns the audio signal that's going over that USB-C connection into a standard 1/8" headphone jack type format. And that's how I get the audio from my laptop into my speakers. I have a little, effectively a headphone cable that runs from the speakers and plugs into the back of the monitor. So at the end of the day, that mess of cables and all those things you would plug into your laptop to get those various functions, plug into your monitor. Now this can create a bit of a mess of cables behind your monitor, but if you take some time and get a little creative with zip ties and those little Velcro wraps that you can get from Amazon or Home Depot or whatever, and I'll try and link to those down in the show notes. You can nicely route your cables. If you use some sort of monitor arm, which I use in my setup out in the studio, there's generally a provision for hiding your cables. And again, you have to get a little creative with zip ties and stuff to ultimately route those. But you can have this nice, organized, and more or less hidden set of cables connected to your monitor that you're not constantly plugging and unplugging, versus the sort of old school way of plugging power into your laptop and individually plugging in all the USB things that you need to use to get your work done. Some monitors, and this is generally a feature that you see as you go up in price, also include what's called KVM functionality, Kilo Victor Mike, and that stands for Keyboard Video Mouse, which is an obscure way of saying that they can switch one monitor, one keyboard, and one mouse, hence the Keyboard Video Mouse, between multiple computers. And the way this works, and again, this is general, it will vary to some extent by monitor, is you'll have an input for USB-C on the back, which assumes that's where you're going to connect your laptop and be able to use all the USB stuff that's connected to your monitor. And then you'll have a more traditional video interface. So that's typically something like HDMI or DisplayPort, and you'll plug that into, again, typical assumption is you do that to a desktop. This is the setup I have in my home office. And in addition to that video related cable, either HDMI or DisplayPort, you have a special USB cable that runs from the monitor to the desktop computer. And what this allows you to do is through a series of button presses on the monitor, it will switch the video input from your laptop to your desktop or vice versa, which isn't all that exciting, but it'll also switch all the USB inputs from one to the other. So if I'm working on my desktop in my office in the morning, and then it's kind of my transition point to switch over to my work laptop, I can go on my monitor, tap through a couple of menus, and it'll switch wholesale the video signal and all those inputs over from my desktop to my laptop. What's cool about this is after a couple seconds of things sort of waking up and realizing that they've been moved, is I have that same monitor, keyboard, audio, etc., but it's now working with my work laptop or my desktop. If I have a little break and need to switch back over and do something personal, again, a couple or three taps on the monitor and I switch everything over. This sounds a little bit more complicated than maybe it is in reality, and all it really requires in terms of setup is obviously getting that KVM feature on your monitor, and the Dell monitors I've linked to below both have that KVM capability. And it also requires one additional cable, which is a little bit of a funky cable. It's kind of a old-fashioned house-shaped USB cable. I think that's called USB-A, that plugs in on the monitor side, and then a standard high-speed USB cable that plugs into your desktop. So if you're trying to not only manage the ability to plug and unplug a laptop with one cable, which is sort of the standard USB-C functionality, but you also want the ability to use a desktop or kind of a fixed computer with that same desk setup, you can look for that KVM functionality. Now, if you don't want to go out and buy a new monitor, that's absolutely fine. Maybe you have something that you like that's a good resolution, or you just have something that's already positioned on your desk and you don't want to go and goof around with a whole bunch of cables. There's also another solution for you, and that's what's generally called a USB-C docking station. You'll sometimes see these called Thunderbolt docks, sometimes port expanders. They have a bunch of sort of odd names, but I'll link to a couple of them down below. I'll link to one of the newer versions of one that I've used fairly successfully in the past. And what these do is they have a USB-C connection that goes from this little device, which is usually sort of a little rectangular box that sits on your desk. And that goes from the device to your laptop. So it replicates that USB-C connection that you get with a monitor plug-in, and that's your one cable that you plug into your laptop. On the back of these devices, they'll have a power input, obviously, which hopefully provides enough power to charge your laptop of choice. They'll have a video output, which is usually HDMI or DisplayPort. That's the cable you're ultimately going to connect from that box to your monitor. And then they'll have a whole bunch of standard USB-C plugs. And this is where you'd plug in your keyboard, your webcam, any external devices that you want to use. And you'll get that same ability to plug one cable in your laptop, and instead of everything being managed directly by your monitor, this box sort of handles connecting all that stuff and sort of being the orchestrator between your monitor, all your peripherals, and your laptop. Now, the obvious benefit to going that route is you don't have to buy a new monitor. You can retrofit an older monitor. If you have a monitor that's supplied by work or something like that that doesn't have that USB-C functionality, you can get one of these boxes and essentially add that capability in the aftermarket. There's a few negatives to this approach. One is you've got another thing sitting on your desk and another thing to worry about that's got cables coming out of the back that needs power, all that stuff. They've come down in price quite a bit, but generally a good one's probably $100-ish bucks. And they've got a few more caveats that you've got to be aware of, typically around the video performance. So make sure you read the fine print of the dock you're considering purchasing. Most of them will have some limitation as to the resolution that they can provide and feed out to your monitor. So you might see one that's super cheap, and then if you look in the fine print, it'll say it only supports 1080p. So if you have a nice 4K monitor, that's not really going to help you. A lot of times they'll have some limitation on the refresh rate. So if you have a super awesome monitor and you kind of plug it into an El Cheapo USB-C box, you may not be able to get the performance that you paid for in that super nice monitor because of the limitations of that USB-C box. So just be aware of those as you're looking through the specs, and also, like a monitor with a USB-C power delivery connection, it may or may not have a limitation as to the wattage it puts out. Typically these days you can usually get 90 watts either from a monitor or from one of those boxes. Some of the older units might be 60 watts or 40 watts, and the challenge there is it'll charge your laptop more slowly, or in the worst case, it might not even be able to provide enough power for your laptop to continue working throughout the day. Some laptops in that situation will sort of suck as much juice out of the wall as they can and use the battery for the rest. Others will just sort of switch off the power input, burn off battery, and then in a couple or 3 hours you run out of juice and kind of defeated the purpose of that one cable docking solution. So with all that out of the way, let me walk you through one of my USB-C setups so I can show you kind of a practical application of this in the real world. And this is my studio setup. You can see a full walkthrough of my desk setup that I'll link up in the ether somewhere here. But in this one, I'll focus primarily on the USB-C element and kind of how everything is wired together and how all this stuff works. So in this case, I have a dual monitor setup, and I have a USB-C cable running from each monitor to where I keep my laptop or laptops. And you can, in some cases, connect monitors together. It's called daisy chaining. So I connect monitor number 1 to monitor number 2, then monitor number 2 to my laptop. And by virtue of the monitors being connected to each other, the laptop can talk to both of them. In this case, I went from monitor 1 to my laptop and monitor 2 for my laptop. Now, my thinking behind this is that it lets me have a dual display when I want to. My Mac has 3 USB-C ports, so I can plug in both monitors and live happily ever after in a dual monitor setup. Or alternatively, if I want to use my work laptop and my MacBook at the same time, I can plug each one of those into a separate USB-C cable and essentially have 2 separate computers on 2 separate displays. And my Logitech keyboard lets you switch between devices as long as you install a special program on each of those devices, and that works pretty well. My work has started migrating most of its applications over to the Microsoft 365 platform, which I kind of like because it lets you use essentially any device you want and be able to interact with your work stuff while maintaining all their security and all the policies they demand. So these days, probably 99% of the time, I'm just using that single laptop and plugging it into both of those USB-C ports and getting a dual display set up. On the back of these monitors and plugged into the USB-C ports that are on there, I have my dongle for my Logitech keyboard and mouse. Now I use an Ergo Logitech keyboard, I'll link it down below, and it does have Bluetooth functionality, so theoretically I can connect directly from the keyboard to my laptop, same thing with the mouse. And I've tried that in the past and I've had kind of mixed results depending on what's going on around me. Sometimes if I put my phone on the desk in a certain spot, it'll jack up the Bluetooth signal. And it's, frankly, pretty annoying when you're trying to respond to an email or type in a chat or do whatever and your keyboard stops working. I've switched over to using the little Logitech dongle on all my setups and pretty much anywhere I have a wireless keyboard and/or mouse. And that seems to perform a lot better than just using the built-in Bluetooth functionality. I don't really have any dropouts, I don't really have any problems, unless I take my cell phone and get on a call and put it right next to the back of the computer or right next to the keyboard. It's pretty much 100% reliable. I really like this Logitech setup in particular because, number one, it's one of the few ergonomic keyboards that are out there. And number two, the mouse lasts pretty much forever and it charges also via USB-C. So again, you can see how one cable really can rule them all. And it'll last, probably a month or so of pretty regular use. And it'll give you a pretty good amount of warning before it totally dies and runs out of battery. So in that case, when I finish up my workday, I'll just take that same USB-C cable that I would plug into my laptop, plug it into my mouse, and then the next morning I come back and that sucker is 100% charged. I also have my webcam connected to the USB ports on the back of the monitor. In this case, my monitor does have a USB-C connection, so I plug my 4K webcam, which also uses USB-C, directly into that. And I also have my speakers plugged into each of the monitors using a 1/4-inch jack. Now, the reason I plugged into each of my monitors in this case is, again, so I can get that 2-computer, 2-monitor setup. So if I had my work computer and my personal computer both plugged into separate USB-C cables, I would be able to get audio out of each of them, and it ultimately feeds the same pair of speakers, which can be a little weird if you have 2 things happening on 2 different machines coming out of the same set of speakers, but it worked reasonably well. I also have another dongle that works for my wireless headset, and I connect a Stream Deck to one of the monitors that also allows it to connect to my laptop. That's an accessory that I really had high hopes for and probably don't quite use to its full potential, but maybe that's useful to somebody to know that you can actually connect these things via the same USB-C connection. And then the final thing that I really like, and is a feature I would look for if you were in the market and going to buy a new monitor to support this type of setup, is all my monitors have a little external USB and USB-C port on them. I find this is really nice if I need to read something off a flash drive, or if I need to read something off, say, an external hard drive, or if I'm just connecting some device that I'm messing around with. Occasionally I'll geek out with little radios or programmable boards or something that I need to plug in as a one-off through USB. And since my MacBook doesn't have any standard USB connections, having a little port on the side where I can just plug in a cable, I'll plug in my cable for my Garmin watch or something like that, and then by virtue of plugging it into the monitor, it ultimately connects it back to the laptop, is pretty cool. Some of the newer monitors will even have Ethernet jacks in the back, so by virtue of plugging in that one USB-C cable, you essentially have every port imaginable. And you can also even plug in a regular USB hub, so you would plug that hub into the back of your monitor or your USB-C docking station, and you can add even more USB ports. Now, as you add more and more stuff, ultimately it slows down and sort of floods the connection between your laptop and the monitor, and that's limited by a whole bunch of technical factors. From a practical perspective, I haven't run into any limitation on that, so it's something I don't particularly worry about. But if you were thinking, hey, I can connect 8 5K monitors, I can connect 6 zillion terabits of various disk drives and all that stuff, you may want to do a little more research. Although if you're in that type of situation, you're probably savvy enough to know that you're going to need a little more research, because eventually you'll hit the bandwidth limitations of that USB-C connection. So a few things to be aware of if you're thinking of exploring this setup or you're starting to build one out for yourself. The first one that seems a little bit non-intuitive is that not all USB-C cables are created equally. I think it's still a somewhat new standard, and it's a standard that's evolving to some extent, so it pays to read the fine print of the cable you're looking for. And what I mean by that is, probably the most dramatic example is there's cables that are designed solely for charging. You can kind of feel these cables literally. If you have a USB-C cable that came with some little device you bought, one of the $10 weird Amazon things that plugs into USB-C, it'll probably have sort of a flimsy cable where the wire's thin, you can sort of bend it very easily. And that, in all likelihood, is a charge-only cable. So all those cables can do is flow power from one side to the other. They're not designed to move data. If they are able to move data, it's at pretty low speeds, and essentially it's a good old-fashioned standard USB cable with different ends put on it. There's also higher end power-only cables, so you might see these flagged as a USB charge cable or a USB power delivery cable. These can handle higher wattage connections, so you might see something like this included with a charger for a laptop or some sort of device that has bigger batteries, and that allows you to flow 70, 80, 100 watts over the cable, but it's still not designed to carry data. At the next level, there are cables that are designed to carry data, and you'll see a whole bunch of different specifications around those. You'll see some referred to as Gen 1, 2, 3. You'll see others referred to as Thunderbolt compatible. And even within that subcategory, there's some that will carry power, some that won't, some that limit you to certain wattages, some that tell you they limit you to certain video resolutions. So at the end of the day, I'd recommend if you buy a good monitor, and in my experience, Dell, I've had good luck with Dell, and Dell will usually include a pretty robust USB-C cable that works with all the things. If you don't have a cable that came with your monitor, you're gonna have to go out and do some shopping, and it pays to, number one, read the fine print and figure out if that cable will support everything you want. And generally that means will it support the video resolution you want, will it be able to deliver the level of power that you want, and then will it be able to do all those things over the distance that you want. So since there's so much going on in the USB-C cable, typically you'll be able to find ones that are relatively inexpensive, and by relatively inexpensive I mean in the say $20-ish range, that probably max out around 3 or 4 feet. Once you want to go beyond 3 or 4 feet, you need a more robust cable. They need some more design and perhaps even a little bit of technology in there to make that work. And when you're getting out to like 6-foot length USB-C cables that can do all the things that you'd want them to do, like carry video, audio, data, power, etc., you might be looking at 50, 60, sometimes $100 for a cable. In the case of the cables I used, which I'll link below, which are made by a company called Cable Matters, it even requires that the cable is sort of unidirectional. So there's 2 different colors on each end, and one end is designed to be plugged into the monitor, one end is designed to be plugged in the laptop. I'm not sure of the electrical magic that requires that, but I follow the rules and I've had no problems using the cables that I'm using. And again, I got these because I wanted a 6-foot cable, so I would be able to use these at a standing desk and have it go up and down, and be able to put where I store my laptops off the desk, since outside in this setup, it's a little bit of a smaller desk. Some of the cheat codes you can look for to make this a little easier are, number one, price. If you find a cable that's like $6, it's probably not going to carry data or do all the things you'd want it to do. Some of the other cheat codes, look for a cable that's a certified Gen 2 or Gen 3 USB-C cable, or it says things like certified Thunderbolt, or calls out Intel or some sort of certification. You can also look for things like 4K or 8K video support, which means it's a more robust and higher quality cable able to carry more stuff. And then on the power front, I would look for something that is rated for at least 70 watts of power delivery. Ideally, if you're going to buy an expensive cable, get one that's 100 watt rated. So if you get a more power hungry laptop, or you have a monitor or one of those docking stations capable of delivering a lot of power, you're not going to have problems with the cable. The other minor inconvenience to this setup is, depending on the video conference software you use, sometimes they tend to get confused. if you're doing a video conference just on your laptop and then you go and plug into your awesome dock with one cable and you're in a hurry to jump on that Teams call and you get there, don't be surprised if people can't hear you or any of that. I think Teams has gotten a little better at this, but it will still generally default to the last output and input that you used. So you'll plug into your awesome desk setup, you'll jump on that Teams call, and Teams will be trying to use your MacBook's mic, your MacBook speakers, and your MacBook camera. In my case, I leave my computer closed and kind of plug it into the cables. So, all those things are effectively rendered useless. And then you've got to do this furious run through the settings and go and change all those three inputs and outputs over. I think Teams seems to be getting a little smarter about this, but it's not quite there yet. I wish there was some way where it was smart enough to know that it was plugged into all the stuff and to default to all those things. You can set Teams to use default devices, but then when you're using your laptop without being connected to your dock, or in my case, I have 2 workstations set up, then it defaults to the wrong one invariably when you're on an important call and you're a little bit behind. The other couple notes, the newer Mac OS, and I don't have a Windows laptop that I use anymore, so I'm not sure if there's a similar feature, but on the newer versions of Mac's operating systems, when you plug it into a dock setup like this, it typically won't use all the stuff you just connected the very first time. It'll kind of prompt you and say, hey, you just connected a whole bunch of stuff. Do you really want to do this? And I think that's a security feature. It makes sense, if some bad guy plugged your laptop into something to try and suck whatever was on there off of there, you would want your computer hopefully to try and prevent that. It may be a minor annoyance, and the first time I did it, I had this brilliant desk set up inside, loved the way it worked. I set up my setup out here in the studio, plugged it in with the laptop closed, nothing happened. I was kind of bummed out and wondering what I'd done wrong. I opened the lid of the laptop, logged in, it said, basically, hey, you've connected me to a whole bunch of stuff. Are you cool with this? I said yes, and then everything worked. It seems to remember that you are cool with connecting to stuff for, a few days, a few weeks. If you don't connect to a particular setup after a while, it'll prompt you again. So if you do find yourself with a MacBook, plugging it in and not having anything work, take the few seconds to open up your computer, make sure that it's connected, and it might be asking you, hey, is it cool that I connect to all this stuff? On both Windows and Mac, you may also need to do a little tweaking of the display setup if you want to use your laptop with the lid closed. Some laptops are set to auto sleep when you close the lid. I had that problem with my work Windows laptop. The Mac seems to be a little bit smarter about realizing that you want to actually do some work when you plug a screen in when the thing's closed, but you may need to tweak those settings a little bit. So be prepared the first time you get your desk set up. I would recommend that you have your laptop open, you plug the cable in, you keep your laptop open, you acknowledge any of those prompts that come up, you make sure you can see everything on the displays and it's kind of all working, and then shut the lid. And if everything shuts off, you may still have that setting configured that says, when I close the lid, turn off the computer, and that may require some adjustment. So that's how to set up one cable to rule and dominate your work from home setup. And again, this was a lot of jibber jabber for what's at the end of the day a really straightforward concept, but I want to go into enough depth here so that you would understand how you can design your own setup, how to ultimately plug everything in once you get it, because there is a lot going on here. But once that's done, it does, I think at the end of the day, make me a lot more productive. It does kind of make me, if I'm doing a more advanced project or something where I want a little more focus, it takes away that hurdle of going and digging under your desk to plug all the stuff in, and will get me to go from sitting on the couch to sitting at a more effective workstation, including my standing desk, and getting a little exercise out of things. So it is a a nuanced but pretty nice quality of life improvement for your work from home setup. So with that, this is the Big Heavy wishing you peace and prosperity, and hoping that all your work efforts may be either from home, from the office, from a beach, or wherever you find your most productivity and your most happiness. Big Heavy, wishing you peace. Ever wonder why every talking head on YouTube asks you to hit the like and subscribe button at the end of their video? You were right, because we're living in a computer simulation. And our benevolent robotic overlords get just a little bit of energy every time you hit that like. So do me, the rest of civilization, and our benevolent robotic overlords a favor. Mash that subscribe, be kind to each other, keep living your simulated dreams.